Today we'll be discussing a very exciting data solution that we've been developing over the last 18 months or so. And first of all, let's cover what you should be expecting today. It will be all about consumer spend data and different kind of inside solutions that are linked to that. So last 18 months, I don't have to tell you, it's been quite challenging to everybody across different sectors, from banking to landlords to media to retail and grocery, leisure, all of it. And everybody had to adapt, innovate, and kind of come up with new things of how we do things. Same for us as a data company and a consultancy. It was all about developing new tools to help us help our clients really to navigate some of those challenging markets, challenging conditions. This is where the consumer spend data solution really comes in. And today we just want to use this hour to share what we've learned, kind of what the solution is, where the data comes from, really showcase you some of the strengths of this new data set that we've been using. We got quite a packed agenda today, so let me very quickly introduce the speakers and we will move on. So to kick things off, we'll have Jonathan, who will be setting the scene really. He will discuss some of the consumer behavior changes, some of the big trends, what it means for operators, for landlords, for different businesses and different sectors, what some of the challenges are still out there in the market, and maybe speculate about the future a bit. Jonathan's really going to take a very wide angle, sort of a helicopter macro view of things to really set the scene. We'll follow up with Charlotte, who will really zoom in on the consumer spend data itself. So she'll take a look at the challenges that Jonathan will outline, and we'll showcase how consumer spend data can really help answer some of those questions. Charlotte will dive into what the data is, some of its robustness, some of the examples across different sectors, and really try to bring it all to life. To wrap things up, we'll have a panel session where it will be myself, Chris, and Charlotte. We've all been using this data a lot with our clients across different sectors, answering different types of questions. So we'll be happy to take your questions and kind of answer them as we go. Jonathan will be moderating the panel session at the end. So please send your questions through into the chat here in Zoom, or at the end of the two presentations, come off mute and just ask them. We'll be happy to have a conversation. So that's the format for today. For the next hour, we'll be talking to you about the consumer spend data and its benefits. And without further ado, let's welcome Jonathan on stage. Jonathan, over to you.
Great, thanks very much, Val. So as Val has mentioned, I'll be setting the scene really and kind of talking you through some of the major trends and about how the consumer has changed. So firstly, how are consumers now spending their money? So 2020 saw a 4% reduction in people's overall spend, driven largely by a significant 37% reduction in catering spend and 19% reduction in spend on clothing, as we all spent a large portion of the year locked up at home. Whilst online adoption leapt forward 5 years in 2 months last March with a 44% year-on-year increase in online sales, we don't expect offline sales to recover until 2023, and a lot of that recovery will come from catering spend as we return to socialising. We project that the growth of online will continue across all sectors through to 2030, by which point a third of all spend and over half of comparison goods spend will be online. Whilst the channel shift is here to stay, the category shift is less permanent. So we'll see that the spend in the house and home sector and durable goods categories will slow as those home improvements that were made during lockdown are shown to actually be just spend that has been brought forward. In contrast, those categories that were most heavily hit during the pandemic, such as clothing and footwear and catering, will bounce back strongly in the short term as consumers get back out socialising and back to the office. And we'll see a lot of that growth in clothing and footwear purchasing in particular will remain online, even if the store is still going to be a touch point in that customer journey, meaning that we need to have a greater understanding of the more complex role that physical space will play over the coming years. The pandemic taught us how much mobility can shift as a result of external factors, as evidenced by the sharp declines in visitation to all locations during the UK national lockdown periods. As we move beyond the pandemic, where people now spend their time has been permanently altered as a result of shifting working habits and the wide-scale re-engagement with local areas. Despite a recent uptick in activity since the start of the school year, city centres are still feeling the brunt of this and must now fight harder than ever before to generate sustained footfall. So looking at some key consumer behavioural trends, we see kind of 3 major short-term trends and 6 longer-term trends. In the short term, there's still significant post-pandemic uncertainty with no big bang as consumers are still wary of spending. There are supply chain issues creeping up as well, and these are going to begin to cause a drag on growth as we start to see shortages on shelves and a lengthening of delivery times. Coupled with that are global issues, and consumers are now more interconnected than ever before to what's happening across the globe, as we've seen over the last couple of years as the Black Lives Matter movement and the school strike for climate movements took off globally. Additionally, we've seen that uneven health and economic responses to the pandemic are causing uneven returns to normality. In the longer term, the pandemic has put localism, community, and support for independence at the forefront of shoppers' minds. And this is particularly important in more rural demographics and provides an opportunity for more rural locations to return to their roots as mixed-use hubs. In particular, locations with a high percentage of retail and F&B chains will start to see more vacant units as operators look to rationalise their estates. There are changing lifestyle preferences and the continued shift to experience as people reconnect with people and with places. Additionally, sustainability has continued to rise up the agenda with people seeking greener and healthier ways of living. And there's more of an expectation now that brands that people are buying from will share in these values. Working from home is here to stay to some extent, and the function of the office is changing from a place of work to a place to collaborate and meet with colleagues. And this is going to result in a change in spending patterns in more suburban and rural locations than before the pandemic. And I think this is something Charlotte will touch on a bit later. And there's been a polarization of spend, and the already affluent have come out of the pandemic relatively unscathed, with higher levels of saving compared to the least affluent, who are also about to be hit with the end of the furlough scheme, changes to universal credit, and an increase in national insurance. We know from speaking to clients that whilst there's been a huge growth in the rate of savings, a large portion of this saved money has either been used to pay down debts, placed into easy access savings account, or retained in current accounts. And we predict that the levels kept in current accounts will gradually be drawn down as consumers look to spend on experiences such as going to concerts or on holidays, or continue to pay down their debts. The change in working patterns will result in a shift of grab-and-go locations from city centres to more suburban areas. And as people continue to re-socialise and reconnect, they'll be looking to spend more of their money with food and beverage operators. Niche and novel experiences will thrive, as will national operators with a strong USP, and we'll continue to see strong levels of domestic tourism in the medium term. And of course, the pandemic has meant that all generations are now more comfortable digitally. However, consumers are becoming increasingly aware of the environmental costs of last mile delivery, and it's also increasingly clear that a significant proportion of online spend is being driven by physical store networks, and brands that can offer that full omni-channel experience will continue to thrive. Taking a look at the changes at a sector level, in grocery, there's been a huge growth in the online share of the grocery market to over 13% last year. But we have seen that as restrictions were lifted, much of that spend returned to stores, although retention rates have varied across different demographic groups and different location types. There are also a large number of new entrants to the market with the rise of rapid delivery services, and it's important to understand which customers they are attracting and where they're having the most impact. And additionally, changing economic circumstances mean that there's an increased search for value, and there's a new tier of discounters emerging to try and service this need. In retail, the growth in online sales has accelerated the existing trend of channel shift, with many more people now comfortable shopping online. Consumers are still valuing experience both in-store and online, and it will become increasingly important for retailers to offer something additional to draw customers in-store, whilst ensuring a slick online operation. And the rise of localism and the shift in working patterns means that as consumers are now in different locations and looking to spend their money in different locations compared to before the pandemic. In leisure, after a year and a half of eating and shopping at home, delivery and online behaviours are now embedded, and we're spending more this way than ever before. Consumers are spending significantly more time in their local areas and looking for more appropriate leisure offers right on their doorstep. Many consumers, not all, have lots of disposable cash now, and there's a need for consumer interaction and leisure experiences after months at home. And obviously the challenges around travelling abroad mean that UK operators are benefiting from this boom in domestic tourism. Across all sectors, there's a need for a better understanding now of what to do with different formats and with space. So I've taught you through some of the macroeconomic trends that we've been observing, and in summary, we see three major trends impacting operators over the coming years. So the continued shift of how consumers are purchasing across all sectors as pure play online operators gain market share and consumers integrating online shopping into their daily lives. A shift in the location of where people are based and therefore where they are spending. The rise of localism and the change to our working patterns have altered where we spend our money. And a drive for value, convenience and experience means that now more than ever, operators need to understand how their customers are interacting with their competitors. Just a quick reminder, if you have any questions, then please do post those into the chat. But for now, I'll pass over to Charlotte, who will talk you through how to answer some of these questions using the consumer data.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. So Jonathan has talked you through some of the key macroeconomic changes and also the consumer behavioural trends from the last 18 months. So in this next section, we're now going to investigate how consumer spend data can answer the three major questions around how spend has changed, and we're particularly going to touch on channel shift. We're going to look at where consumers are spending and really crucially who it is that's behind these key shifts. Throughout the course of this next section, I'll be using actual data and I'll be drawing upon case studies from key retailers to help to bring the data to life. So I wanted to start things off by showing you all this graph. It might look or feel like what we've all been on over the last 2 years, a roller coaster of sorts. But what it really shows is the online and the in-store sales patterns for IKEA over the last 2 years. We've had shops close, open, we've had lockdowns, easings, even circuit breakers. You name it, we've had it over the last 2 years. But what is fascinating to see is how this is all translated in what we as consumers did with our money. So if we take IKEA as an example, you can see the drastic impacts that lockdown have had on the offline sales, but most interestingly, the way in which consumers switched to online with only a short lag. If we were to compare this to an example in the grocery sector, we would see that the spike is even more immediate, as we all needed our groceries and some IKEA projects were no doubt put on hold slightly. So when shops were able to reopen again, you can see in this IKEA example that they quickly reached and exceeded, in some cases, their previous year's sales. And this interplay between channels and the insight that the spend data can offer into consumer behaviours will now be explored further throughout this section. So before I dive into some of the data, it's worth giving you all a bit of background on what the data is that's underpinning this insight. So the consumer spend data is transactional spend data from major UK banks, and the total database covers over 9 million UK adults. Within the fixed base, which is the base that we most commonly use for our clients, this represents over 9% of UK adults, so it really is a large sample. The data is actual spend data that's ACON coded, gives you insight and spend by retailer, by channel, being online or offline, and at a really local level, so we can get down to postcode sector or LSOA for those who use census geography. So it really gives you a total market view of what's happening both within your own business, but also across the competitive landscape. So throughout this next section, we're going to touch upon examples from retail, leisure, and grocery, but the data is also available for brands, for retailers, for operators across a really broad range of categories. And I've just put a few here as examples, but the list kind of goes on. So enough of that. Let's go back to DIY and let's go back to homewares. It's probably all something that we've done over the last year in one capacity or another. And I'm sure you all will have seen the headlines around the sales of homewares booming, and it is absolutely true. So when we dig into this spend data, we can reveal that sales have soared within some brands by over 40%, seeing the year-on-year growth rise quite substantially. But when we analyse this further, it starts to get really interesting. And this is what's key with the spend data. We can start to understand who it is that's driving this boom and by what channel too. So if we continue with this example, we're going to use B&Q. It's a brand we probably all know and love, and they have experienced substantial growth over the last year. So Kingfisher, and the group that owns B&Q, reported a 158% jump in e-commerce sales in 2020/2021. And when we look within the consumer spend data, the trends seen are very similar. So we actually see the offline growth across all the different consumer groups sits at around 40%, and the online growth at around 170%. Analysing the growth by consumer segments using CACI's Acorn segmentation highlights which consumer groups have actually seen the greatest proportional growth rates. So career climbers, who are kind of younger couples or young families, have seen the biggest growth across all of the different segments. And these are followed by the young hardship groups. So they're young families, couples or singles, getting onto the property ladder for the first time, or perhaps embarking on some home DIY activities. What this analysis also shows is that the younger demographics have been visiting in-store to a greater extent compared to pre-COVID, whereas groups such as countryside communities, comfortable seniors and executive wealth, who all tend to be slightly older, they've actually been more in favour of online purchasing. So another big brand that's been in the news a lot over the last year or so are Pret. So Pret have been introducing some really innovative schemes around trying to encourage people back through their kind of unlimited coffee subscriptions, etc. And performance across Pret will vary by location type. And I will go on throughout the presentation to touch on that in a bit more detail. But if we look across kind of a Great British, the GB kind of sales levels, we can see that actually overall sales are down over a 2-year period. So within the data here, we're analysing April 2019 to April 2021. And each of those coloured lines represents a different demographic group. So you can see overall the sales are down. But what's really interesting is when we dig a little deeper into the data, we can actually reveal that consumers are spending more when they are spending. So city sophisticates and career climbers, both of their average transaction values have actually increased. So 9% for city sophisticates and 8% for career climbers. So this is really interesting. And if Pret can actually continue to capture more of the trips, if they can start to appeal to more occasions, then it could be great news for the brand going forward. And I'm sure we would have all seen kind of in the news yesterday about the fact that they're hiring, I think it was around 3,000 new staff that they're looking for. So this all comes back to how spend data is helping to reveal both how consumers' mindsets and their behaviours have shifted. And from analysing both our worker surveys, which have been conducted throughout the pandemic, but also just anecdotally speaking to colleagues, we're definitely all in agreement that when we're back in the office, we end up eating spending more on eating and drinking out. So it's really the spend hasn't decreased, it's been rebalanced, and it's about capturing this spend. As Jonathan showed earlier, footfall has been impacted throughout the pandemic, and where people spend their time has been permanently altered, with some areas experiencing levels of footfall in excess of pre-COVID times, and others are remaining below. Mobile app data, which is what you're seeing here, is able to illustrate how footfall has changed by different location type. So this graph here is comparing rural towns to city centres. But we need the consumer spend data to then inform how this is impacted upon spend. And when we layer these two together, it can really help to drive forward our kind of important rules when you're thinking around complex predictive modelling, for example. So with continuing with our example of Pret, in the spend data that we've analysed for this, we've been looking at where the spend has originated from and not where it was actually spent. And when we look at the data in this way, it reveals 3 really key trends for Pret, which no doubt will transcend across the industry as a whole. So the first one, key London commuter towns, so areas such as Reigate, Weybridge, Hampton Hill, they've all seen some of the largest reductions in sales. So we're sitting around kind of 70%, rising to 74% in Reigate. So these locations are not within an easy reach of a Pret, and workers kind of being back at home the majority of the time, they've shifted their expenditure to in-home or alternatively to other nearby coffee shops. So perhaps to some more local independent brands, which, as Jonathan mentioned, has been a key theme for the year. The second key bit of insight that it reveals is that students, particularly within the Leeds area, have remained one of the most stable groups for Pret. So if we look at Hyde Park or at Woodhouse, which for those of you who are familiar with Leeds will know that they're key student areas, we've seen that actually the reduction in spend, which has originated from those locations, has actually only decreased by around 15% over the time period. And thirdly, it's obvious, we all know it, London sales have been severely impacted throughout COVID for Pret. But when we look at suburban locations within London, they've actually fared better than the worker hubs. And it's all really down to office workers again. They're staying at home and they have access to Pret in their suburban kind of areas where they live. So they've shifted their spend from the city centre locations towards their more suburban Pret. So moving on to a slightly different sector. So for those of us who work within the grocery sector, Pret's expansion into supermarkets with small format stores has been really interesting. So they're actually looking to cater to food on the go. But if you look at the other end of the spectrum, there's also been a lot of talk about Mir. So if you haven't heard about Mir before, they're commonly dubbed as the Russian Lidl or the Russian Aldi, and they're entering the UK market for the first time with really ambitious growth plans. Recent reports by McKinsey have actually shown that grocery CEOs are reporting down trading or increased price sensitivity as the #1 trend for them. So being able to analyse the impacts of new entrants will become ever more important as we see this shift. So many of the key questions being asked are, who will Mir be taking market share from with their new Preston site opening? And what do existing grocery retailers therefore need to do when it comes to activities such as local store marketing or other strategies to overcome the challenge of a new entrant to a market? So consumer spend data can tell you. So if we look within a 15-minute drive time catchment, which is what this map on the left-hand side is showing you, and we analyse the postcode sectors within the drive time, we can reveal that 77% of the market share comes from the 7 retailers in the chart that I've just put up on the right-hand side. So undoubtedly, there is a strong value and discounter present in the market already around Preston. But what will be really key and really interesting is if we look back and do this analysis in, say, 3 or 6 months' time, and start to look at where the shifts in spend have come from. If I was to kind of hazard a guess, I would say that it would have, of course, some of it would have come from the grocery market, but also from wider brands such as B&M and Poundland, as a few examples. And finally, for those of you who signed up to our Insight webinar, you would have seen how the consumer spend data can help to measure the impact of physical locations on online performance. So the map on the left-hand side here shows the current network of city centre Zara stores compared to city centre benchmark locations which don't have a Zara currently present. When we start to link in consumer spend data with our retail catchment model, we can reveal that Zara's online market share is 43% higher in the catchment around their city centre stores when compared to city centre locations without a Zara. And when we dig into the detail, we can see that this varies in terms of the uplift. So we can see Leicester, Brighton and Oxford all have between a 60 and 75% uplift, with the London West End having a whopping 162% uplift of market share of online sales compared to locations without a store. Conversely, this methodology also shows the locations that haven't had a positive impact on online sales, and this is equally as important when we're considering network change. So as we've demonstrated today, there's a wealth of fascinating, actionable insights to be gained from the consumer spend data. Whether it's using the data to enhance forecast modelling techniques, to scope out a market prior to entering, or simply to understand who both your and also your competitors' customers are, the data can help to answer questions that haven't been possible before. So thank you all very much for your time this morning. I'm now going to hand back to Jonathan, who'll be the host for our panel session this morning.
It's great. Thanks very much, Charlotte. Yeah, as kind of said before, if you have any questions during this section, then please do stick your hand up and feel free to kind of shout them out. So we've got Chris, Charlotte and Val. We've had a couple of questions come through directly, so I'm going to pass this first question over to Charlotte. Aren't we going to have a bias to the types of people who tend to pay with card?
Yes, so I'd say that within any data set, we're going to have a bias. There's an inherent bias within any sort of data. And within card and kind of consumer spend data, again, there is a slight bias. So within the data that we use, we actually see a slight affluence bias to the data. And it's also important to consider groups such as maybe your slightly older demographic groups who might not use card in the same relation that they use cash. However, because, as I said earlier, it's all linked up to Acorn, so our consumer segmentation, we're able to understand what the bias is within the data. And because Acorn is a UK-wide segmentation, we can then understand kind of what the population looks like across the UK, and we can model the two up against each other. So it's quite easy for us to flex out and remodel that bias within the data.
That's great, thank you. I'm going to throw this next one to actually, this is probably back to you as well, Charlotte. What's the benefit of using LSOA data over postcode sectors?
Yeah, so originally we actually mainly did most of our analysis using this data at postcode sector level, but we found that increasingly some clients actually work and they build their models far more using the census geography. So that's why we just have the flexibility really, depending on what you as your kind of in-house teams like to use, the postal versus census. it just gives you that flexibility to incorporate it more easily into your existing kind of project work. So that's why we also have the LSOA option.
Great, thank you. Next question, I think, to kind of the broader team. To what extent do you anticipate spend by channel to revert back to normal as we recover from the pandemic? And I guess this might be different by demographics or by sector.
I'm happy to kick off on that one. So I think it's fair to say we're never going to see a return to what normal used to look like in terms of spend by channel. I think everyone's got a lot more comfortable with transacting online, and demographic groups that previously we've been adverse, resistant to using digital channels have been forced into doing so, have become comfortable using them. I would say as things open up, people's lives get busier and convenience and experience become a bigger, continue to remain important, the role of the store will evolve and there'll be a little bit of a rebalancing. So I can see the level of online spends, as online spend as a proportion of total spend reducing slightly in sort of the short to medium term, as consumers get back into more normal routines and spending habits, returning to the office, going out socializing with friends and family more and more. But I don't think we're ever going to see a return to sort of pre-pandemic levels.
Yep, completely agree with Chris. I think just the only thing maybe to add on top of that is, we're not coming back. We're not going back to 2019. Market has changed quite a lot, and there are new players that entered the market over the last 2 years or so that are digitally native, online only sorts of platforms. A big example in grocery sector is, of course, the rapid delivery platforms. There are maybe 5 or 6 of the 6 or big ones out there. And actually those type of services, they can translate across other categories, not just grocery, and actually quite big across some of the other European markets. And maybe kind of UK is catching up on some of those right now. So yeah, we could in grocery specifically, we already have seen a bit of a kind of a shift, a slight drop in online and back to kind of in store for specific demographic groups, but it's definitely not going to 2019 levels. And those new entrants into the market that are online only are going to help keep that share of online spend.
Great, thank you very much. Had another question come through. So the question is, it's probably directed for you, Charlotte. What is the source of the transaction data? Is it credit or debit card transactions? If you can elaborate any further.
Yeah, of course. So we're looking within this when we're using the fixed space at debit card transactional data. It comes from a number of different kind of sources and it's all combined into one. So the typical way that the transaction data works is that for those of you that are signed up on those sorts of accounts, that when you spend, I'm going to use a rubbish example now, but when you spend £5 with Pret, you might get 10% back on your purchase, and because you've got one of those types of accounts. What it means is that we actually have to be able to see all the transactions that are coming in through that account, so that we know which ones, so the banks know which ones they need to kind of credit the rewards out for. So by having that type of kind of interaction with the accounts, that's why we're able to see the total kind of view of what is happening. So there doesn't have to be kind of an active reward on the account for us to be able to see that spend data, because it's collecting it at all times. Hopefully that helps to elaborate.
Great, thank you. Another question comes through. So the sort of eating out and leisure sector as a whole tends to have pretty sort of poor data. How have we used this in the leisure sector, this data? It's probably one for you, Chris.
Yeah, so again, I suppose you're completely right. Yeah, data capture in the leisure sector is generally fairly poor because they've got a limited online presence. People are going in, they're dining out, they're paying on their card. There's very little data capture unless people are signing up to loyalty programs. So there's a number of different ways we've been using it within the leisure sector. One of which is purely just getting a view of who actually are our customers, what they look like, how does it vary by spend, and therefore, what else should I be doing, and how do I benchmark against my competitors? So that's probably one of the main ones, probably a bit of a golden ticket with that sector in particular because of how data poor some operators have been historically. But I think that the real sort of benefit both for leisure and also for sort of wider sectors as well, both with sort of landlords, traditional sort of capacity goods retail and grocery, is the ability to monitor and track both your own performance and that of your competitors with that demographic overlay. So being able to understand you've made a change here, or your competitor made a change here, what's happened, who's impacted, and which consumers have changed their eating, dining out, gaming habits as a result of that. And therefore you get a really clear picture of, okay, if this was to roll out, where would it be best placed, why, and who's it going to impact? If a competitor's doing it, is it going to impact me? Do I need to look at trying to replicate or improving on that concept or initiative that they're doing? And we've seen this with leisure, with motorway service stations, understanding how discounted fuel offers impacts where people are coming from and their market share in particular areas. So it's I think those are the sort of two main ones. One being that customer insight piece, which is a unique challenge within that growth sector, and the second one being the ability to track both your own and competitive performance over time.
Yeah, the only thing I'd probably add to that as well is that increasingly in the market, we're also seeing kind of private equity being kind of a key kind of feature of unfortunate in some cases, brands going, the change that's happening within the sector. And it's about, as Chris said, using that customer insight that you can get to it to see how brands within different portfolios, how their profiles actually align or how they're different. And again, it's just being able to offer that insight where we wouldn't previously have had data. And I think that's why everyone gets so excited by it, particularly those of us that are into seeing all the data and kind of the detail of what it can offer.
Cool, thank you very much. I think we've got one final question. What's going to happen if we have the lockdown?
I want to know who asked that. Let's really hope there isn't another lockdown. It very much depends, really, I guess, on what the government response is. Are we going to be in, permanent lockdowns? Are things going to be able to open up again? One thing's for sure, I think we've probably done our fair share of DIY and home improvements. And from the spend data that Jonathan showed, it shows that we've spent that money, and it's expenditure that was brought forward from the future. So we don't expect there for us to continually paint our kind of rooms, to continue kind of do home improvements. So no doubt there'll be kind of probably further consolidation of the high street, leisure operators and things like that. And in the grocery sector, I probably expect there to be another spike. So if we really can't go out to leisure operators, we might shift some of that expenditure back in home again. So we might see some further spikes in that. But here's touching wood that we don't have another lockdown. Any questions, drop us an email. Drop an email to your account managers, to your people who you know from CACI. We'll be happy to take those conversations forward.
Thanks very much, everybody. And see you soon.